Spirited Harmony, Episode 2 Spells, Snacks, and Self-Care with guest Amy Mars. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Spirited Harmony. I'm Leslie Richards, your host, and today I'm so excited because I have a really special guest joining us, my cousin, Amy. She's a mom of two, a huge Harry Potter fan, and someone who seriously knows how to throw an epic Harry Potter themed party. Not to mention, she's got some fantastic insights on balancing life, fun, and self-care, especially around Halloween time, which makes this episode even more magical. If you loved episode 1 and our chat about finding balance and embracing creativity, today's episode will be even more fun as we dive into party planning, self-care, and all things magical and festive for the season. But before we get into the interview, I just want to say thank you for tuning in and making this podcast such a great joy to create. Whether you're catching up on episodes during a workout, running errands, or relaxing, I'm thrilled you're here. Now let's cast a little spell and jump into today's chat with Amy.
I'm so happy that you're here.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am a mom of two. I'm married and I live in Charleston, South Carolina. I moved here by way of New York City, which was my dream to live there. I am, I lived there for 13 years and loved it. I don't want to live there anymore, but I still miss it. And what else is there to know? I feel like I'm on my fourth career at this point in life, which is not at all what I had planned for myself at a young age, but here we are.
Well, you changed multiple times throughout your career of what you really want to do. Because 20, it seems really great. And then you find out maybe that's not what I want to do for the next 40 years.
Yeah, my career a lot of decisions felt like they were made for me. I mean, I always had a choice, but the change that happened, I think required me to evaluate whether I should continue on or not, or adjust. And so after I had made that first harsh decision to change, they became easier as the changes came.
I know you have a big Harry Potter party that you put on every year. As I can see in your background, you have Harry Potter blasting his spells towards us.
Yes, I tried to move him. I need to move him over.
If you could have dinner with any of the Wizarding World Harry Potter characters, who would you have dinner with? And why?
So this one is an interesting answer or it's an interesting question, but there are many characters that I all like for different reasons, but for dinner guests or ones that I would want to dine with, I would actually choose Fred and George Weasley, because I think going out to dinner with them would be a blast. There would be no shortage of conversation or mischievous events that could potentially take place during a dinner. And I imagine the dinner would lead to one heck of a good time out afterwards. So I would choose the two of them.
Nice. Do they dress up at your party?
Oh, yeah.
So do they dress up as the characters? Or is it more Halloween themed?
It's more, so the party itself is kind of a prequel to trick-or-treating. And so it started out as hey, let's just get the kids fed some dinner so that we can trick or treat. And it just kind of got bigger and bigger and bigger. And as I started to decorate, I'm not a scary kind of person. Like, I don't have the creepy stuff in the front yard. And, my decorations started to gravitate towards Harry Potter, and those things tend to be prettier as far as like Halloween decorations go. And so the theme just kind of evolved into only Harry Potter. And we, for the most part, have always dressed as Harry Potter characters. My parents always come, they get really into it. They always dress up too. I actually hate dressing up. I'm not a huge dress up person, but I do it. And there are usually several people that will come in Harry Potter attire. Last year, we had a ton of people in Harry Potter, and it was great. But I think every year it kind of changes. So we'll have different stuff. But
did you wear the same each year? Or do you change up?
I always change.
Okay.
Every year. So it's a different costume. My parents are different. The kids are going rogue this year. They're not doing Harry Potter. I got inspired by something that we had experienced when we had gone to Universal into the Wizarding World there. And they had this kind of cart that you could go up to, and you could get a gilly water and have a potion, some kind of potion that you poured into your gilly water. And they were all different colors and stuff. And so I was like, that would be fun for the kids. They could kind of like create their own little potion. Usually the highlights are like the polyjuice potion. Like the kids always ask if I'm gonna have the polyjuice potion. So that I generally have pumpkin juice that's spiked for the adults.
So do you make butterbeer for the event?
I do.
Or something on the side?
I have not, I've done butterbeer, but I tend to do butterbeer cookies or butterbeer fudge. Everyone seems to love the pumpkin juice, so I just kind of keep that.
Sounds good. Do you have that posted anywhere on how to make the pumpkin?
I do. I have it on my website. So I have the pumpkin juice, and it can be made alcoholic or non-alcoholic. It's good either way.
Sounds good. I don't think I've ever juiced a pumpkin, but
yeah. Well, you don't actually have to juice a pumpkin, but that would be a good idea.
Your website and talking about cooking, you did a food journey of, meal planning and recipe blog and all of that. And so how did that transition? Because you used to be in fashion, then you went to food. What made your transition to go to that?
So when my daughter was born, was when we lived in New York City, and right before she was born, I was still working in fashion and still had my fashion company. And it was around then that my business partner and I decided that the business was moving in a direction that we did not want to go. And we had kind of reached a crossroads where we could continue on the path or we could close. And it was a very tough decision for both of us, but the most optimal position would be to close. So we closed it. So I found myself kind of at home mourning like the loss of my career, so to speak, as as we welcome this new family member into our family. And so it was it was a tough transition for me into motherhood, with all these things that were going on at the same time. And at the time, I had read somewhere that starting a blog was a good way to kind of organize your thoughts and get things out there, but with very low stakes. And so I had kind of started doing that, and it was something that I enjoyed, and had to cook as it was. And I always enjoyed cooking. And so I started to put some of the recipes that I always made and that my friends loved out there, because so many people had asked for my lemon bars and certain pound cakes and stuff that I used to always make. And so I was like, oh, this is great. I can just send them a link instead of having to type out a recipe. Right. And I mean, this was 15 years ago when things weren't quite as easy to send now as they were back then. But so I kind of transitioned into doing food only. It made the most sense, and it was the easiest thing to do at the time. And it just kind of grew from there. And it was something that I enjoyed, and it was easy to do when my daughter was sleeping. And then again, once we had our son.
Mm-hmm. It's definitely a creative outlet that I've put recipes on my blog, and it's something that, even if only a couple people look at it, it's a way for you to write and get your story out there. Although I do appreciate how you write your recipes, is you don't necessarily put, like a whole monologue right before it. I always joke that, one day somebody's going to say that they murdered their husband in there, but you just jump to the recipes. So nobody actually reads it.
Yeah. No, that's one of my favorite lines is seeing that. That's like such a funny saying. And, it's interesting because when I first started the site, I wasn't writing enough. And this was kind of like early search engine days. And you could kind of just put whatever you wanted. But then the search engine started to dictate what you had to put in there. And when I started my site, I had no intention of turning it into a business. And even when I filed for my business license and started paying taxes, I was like, it's not a business. And my husband was like, but we're paying taxes, so it's a business. So it took me several years, and I think that's because of what I went through with my first business. And so it took me several years to come to the conclusion that this is a business. And once I started treating it like one, things changed. And then the search engine started to dictate kind of how you had to write things. And that's why people started writing these long posts and whatnot. But I could never drone on and on about, the salad that I had at a restaurant once, or, I was like, I mean, it's good.
You knew the waiter's name and his backstory.
Right. So it's like, just make the salad. I mean, but a couple years ago, things kind of changed again, and it was less about the story behind why you're putting this pumpkin pie on your site, and more about information about making it. And I was like, well, that's actually much more helpful and much more enjoyable. I mean, so I don't read blog posts. I'm a firm believer in hitting the jump to recipe button.
So do you have a go-to recipe that either for your family, or if you're going to put a dinner on for friends?
I have recipes that I make regularly, but I don't have any go-tos, only because I kind of like to, if we're hosting friends over, assess what those friends like and what their kids will eat. And so I have quite a few recipes that I would go to and use those. I usually would never try anything new because that's a little too risky, but I always I do have some like Old Faithfuls, but nothing that I wouldn't say any one, only because I think it depends on who you're having. So, and kind of what you're in the mood for. Because I've learned that when it comes to cooking and entertaining, I have to want to eat it just as much as I want to serve it. And so if I am not going to enjoy cooking it, the fun kind of falls from the hosting.
It's always fun to try new stuff too, I would have to say. And it's your theme of what you're going for.
Right.
Because I mean, if you're having friends over, there's probably like you're having game night, or you're doing something for the holidays, or because majority of the time, I don't know about myself. Like if I'm inviting people over, it's normally for some kind of celebration.
Right.
It's very rare that I'm going to invite somebody over just to have dinner.
Right.
Yeah. And like, even with cooking at home, like you do get stuck in a rut, I would say, of doing the same recipes over and over again. I just recently started, I pull all my cookbooks down and I make the kids go through them. I'm like, tell me what you want, pick something. And then we'll do like 2 new ones each week, and we'll bookmark them. So then they get to try something. And some have been fabulous. Some have been like, no, we're never going to make that again.
Yeah. No, that's a great idea. And I've kind of gone back towards cookbook recipes, actually, because the recipes in cookbooks have been vetted a bunch. And so they're sometimes can be a little bit more trustworthy than ones that you might find online, depending on where you find them.
Right. Have you ever thought about putting all your recipes in a cookbook?
I have, but I don't want to do all the work that's involved in a cookbook. I have many friends that have cookbooks because being in the food blogging and food industry now, I have lots of friends with cookbooks, and I just am not ready to go down the work. It's almost a 2-year commitment, and I'm not there yet.
It is a lot of work.
Yes.
I know I made one for the center as a fundraiser one year, and all the seniors brought in their favorite recipes. And if I didn't have an intern for 6 months just to type in all those recipes, I would have never gotten that done.
No, just typing it in alone is just takes forever.
It does. And it wasn't even that big of a cookbook. Like, it was like a 50-page cookbook.
Right.
So being a mama too, I know that balancing life is always crazy. I mean, children just make you juggle life continuously. But trying to find time to fulfill self-care. I am terrible at remembering to do so. How do you take time for yourself for self-care?
So I also struggle with this because I struggle with the guilt that comes with it.
Oh yeah, there's tons of mom guilt.
Right, not correct in the sense that I should have the guilt. But I think that I have learned scheduling things for myself during the day while they are at school is much easier for me to go about and do them because it's not taking away time from family time or anything like that. But I have a few things that I do. I get my nails done, which I had stopped because I was like, oh, this is frivolous. I don't need to spend money on this. But I do things like that on a regular basis. And I'd started, getting my haircut and colored on a regular basis because that was always something that was erratic before when they were much younger, just because it's the nature of your schedule when you have super young kids. But now I make it a point to do those things on a regular basis. And so I feel like that kind of helps with self-care in the terms of I feel better because I think I look better. And also it causes me to pause. It causes me to go do something that stops me from working or laundry or whatever else somebody else needs.
I do agree with that. If you can get it done while they're in that school time, it makes a huge difference. Because there's a ton of guilt you feel when like they're out of school and you're like, oh, I'm going to do this for myself. But, just go hang out with dad.
Yeah. Right.
And it's not that, it's not going to entertain them and do a whole bunch of fun stuff with them. It's just you're not with them. You're not enjoying that moment with them. I know you're in a book club. I have just started being in one recently, and I've really got into, it's a funny story. I got into reading this summer because our library had an excellent summer reading program that the kids got into. So I started reading with them, but I do audio much more than I can hold a book. Because then I can do two things at once.
Yeah.
I feel like, oh, I can still work, but I'm going to listen to my book in my ear, or I can cook dinner and I can listen. But what made you decide to jump into a book club?
Well, after I had my daughter, she's about 6 months old. When we lived in New York, I had a friend invite me to join her book club. And I had never been in one before, but I had always loved reading. Reading is just my favorite pastime. And so I was like, okay, yeah, I'll do this. And I loved it. I loved the book club. And it was the most diverse book club because of just the way it came together. And it was so much fun. We had ages 23 to 78 in the book club. And it was just this eclectic group of people. And it was so much fun. And I looked forward to doing it and reading the books every single time. And so when we moved to Charleston, I missed it and decided that I would start one here. And so not long after we moved here, I started one, and my current book club, I'm still technically the only standing member, but the girls that are in the club now have probably been in the book club for about 7 years.
Wow.
And it is such a great asset in my life. And it's wonderful because we don't, outside of book club, really see each other. And that's kind of like the only time that we really come together. But it's just such a great group of women. And I absolutely love my book club and all the women in it. It's so fun.
Is there a certain genre that you guys stick to, or do you kind of change it up throughout the year?
So it kind of changes up based on who's hosting. There's not a specific genre. I mean, we actually have an author that's a published author in our book club, but she kind of tends towards like more like murder mystery kind of stuff. And then we have another one that kind of tends towards like more of like a lighter kind of love story or something. But there's not really any one genre that we stick to.
Have there been any that you just couldn't bring yourself to read?
There was one and only one. Because I've always pretty much, even if I didn't love the book, I found a way to kind of get through it. And there haven't been any that I've just hated. There have been some that I've listened to the audio and the audio's turned me from it just because I didn't like the voice that was reading, or the voices that they did for the characters. And it just kind of like, it just made it harder to kind of get through it. But, and I wasn't the only one. I had done a book that was a fiction book on Truman Capote. And it was a wonderful book called Swans of Fifth Avenue, and everyone loved it. And so the next person that was up to host, she was like, well, why don't we just do like a Truman Capote book? That'll be great. So she chose In Cold Blood. And that is quite possibly the most terrifying book I have ever half read in my entire life. And it was at a time where we all had husbands that traveled and everything. And, don't want to give anything away if anybody wants to read it, but it's about a brutal murder that just kind of is like in the middle of nowhere and sort of happens for no reason. And it is terrifying. I was like, I can't read this. I literally cannot read this. This is terrible. And it was funny because once I fessed up, everyone else did too, and no one finished it. So that was pretty much the only book that I have yet to finish. So I'm sure that he is obviously very acclaimed and incredible writer, but he's too realistic. So I couldn't read it.
My imagination will take that too far.
Well, that's my problem with some of the scary stuff is I have too much of a creative imagination. And as someone who faints very easily, like the other night I was reading a book and there was a gory scene in it and I almost passed out. I had to call my husband in the room. I was like, I need a Coke right now and a cold washcloth. And like he was like, you're as white as death. He's like, what did you do? And I was like, I was just reading. And he was like, oh my goodness. I was like, I can't help it. Like, I just have a very creative imagination. I have to be careful with what I read. Like it. So I tend not to go that route either, which is why Harry Potter's always my how.
If you were going to say a all-time favorite genre, though, what would you say?
This is new, and this is going to expose me. And I haven't told anybody. Well, I have told some people, and they're my like closet fans of this genre. But I have really gotten into fantasy, and it's bizarre. Obviously Harry Potter's fantasy, but technically it kind of has its own shelf at like Barnes and Noble, so it's kind of its own thing. But I've never been a fantasy reader. I've never cared for it, even though I have a creative imagination. It's never been something that's drawn me in. I couldn't get into Game of Thrones. I couldn't get into even Lord of the Rings. And I know that those are incredible books by incredible authors, but I just never could get into it.
I would have to say comedic romance is probably my favorite. I always love a good, funny love story.
Yes.
If you were speaking to somebody wanting to start their own book club, what would your best piece of advice be to do so?
I would say to not necessarily go to your closest friends. I would almost say try and find people that really love reading, because you want a group of committed readers, because when you have that, one, you're going to all want to actually talk about the book instead of just get together. And it's more than just getting together. It's like we all truly enjoy reading and we all really enjoy talking about the books. And it's just something that's fun for us.
What would your piece advice be for any gathering, not just Halloween or Harry Potter?
Right. I would say I'm a planner, and I think the devil is in the details. And so I always like to plan everything out in advance. I save those plans so that I can always go back to them, whether it's a small get together or something much bigger, like a Halloween party. And so that way, if you're planning in advance, it's rare that there's going to be any surprises or blowups or anything that could come crashing down. But I say always have a good pizza place in hand, because sometimes things just don't work out.
Well, Amy, thank you for stopping by.
Absolutely.
And I am so happy I got to talk to you and you tell us all your fun life tricks and tips.
Thank you. And thanks for having me.
And with that, we've come to the end of today's episode. Amy, thank you again for joining me and sharing a bit of your world with us. It's always a joy. And to all of you listening, I hope you've taken away some great party ideas, self-care tips, or even a good book genre to check out. Don't forget to check out the show's notes of links to Amy's pumpkin juice or to some of her other Harry Potter themed recipes. Before we go, I wanted to remind you to take deep breaths and to carve out a moment for yourself this week. Even in all the chaos, self-care is still magic. So let's do it together. 5 deep breaths in, 5 deep breaths out. Here we go. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Breathe in. And out. Last one. Make it a good one. Breathe in. And push all that happiness out into the universe, out. Thanks again for listening to Spirited Harmony. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It really helps the show. Next week, we're going to dive into thankful cards and show how you can brighten someone's day every day in November. I can't wait to see you back next time. Until then, keep spreading joy and creativity wherever you go. Sending love and sunshine your way. Bye, guys. Be sure to check out Spirited Harmony on Patreon and YouTube.